Z. Hey. Oi. Hello. ¿Estamos prontos? ¿Estáis listos? Ok, tudo bem? Estamos? Bom dia. Dormiram ou não dormiram esta noite? Pouco, não? Ok. Agora vamos a começar a nossa programação de palestrantes magistrais com uma pessoa, não estou a lembrar agora, que o que ele fez uma coisa muito importante, mas não lembro. Oi, cara, esqueci. A Sagal Jovener, as minhas assistentes de palco, podem subir a me ajudar, por favor? Presento as minhas assistentes de palco, um aplauso para eles. Bom dia.
Bom dia. Bom dia, Campus Party!
Bom dia, Sagal.
Bom dia.
Esqueci. Vocês lembram quem é o cara que tem que vir agora? Não sei.
Um cara que viaja bastante. O cara que tem o melhor programa de milhagem do mundo.
É um vendedor de carros, vendedor de alguma coisa, não?
Vende motores.
Motores? Sim. De carro.
Um super carro.
Um super carro. Não sei, esqueci. O cara fez alguma coisa importante, não sei.
Ele anda meio engraçado, assim.
Pode fazer uma demonstração? Vamos. Parece mesmo que você leva. Faz a escafandra. Falta a escafandra.
Aqui a gravidade é um pouco mais acelerada aqui.
Ok. Como está esta campus? Está tudo bem?
Tá tudo ótimo. Tá fantástico. O pessoal aí, né, tá de prova.
Bom, estamos a começar. Bem, obrigado. Vocês têm que falar, vocês têm uma hora diária que tem uma atividade na campus, não?
Sim, na verdade a gente tem 2 horas por dia. Lá fora, no palco, na área Expo, a gente faz todo dia de 7h30 às 8h30. E aqui dentro também todos os dias de 9h45 até 11 horas, em vários palcos. Cada dia num palco diferente, é só olhar a programação e procurar a gente.
A galera tem que procurar a Jovem Nerd e a Sagal. Um aplauso para eles, Jovem Nerd. Obrigado. Já lembrei. Ontem esteve conosco na inauguração, foi uma honra contar com ele cá. É uma pessoa inacreditável, um ser humano incrível, um herói. Ademais, é uma pessoa muito humilde. Falar com ele é, de verdade, um prazer. Para mim, é a pessoa mais simpática de toda a crew do Apollo 11, realmente. E é uma honra enorme poder apresentar hoje o primeiro palestrante magistral da Campus Party Brasil, o Buzz Aldrin. Um aplauso!
Did he say there'd be a video first?
Yeah. Okay. They're going to play the Apollo Dream first.
Okay.
What's your name?
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
You are go for staging.
Yeah. Very colorful.
Jefferson Drive.
I'm wondering if it gets... No, it doesn't get too close to light year.
I'd like to trace through a little bit for you developments that have taken place in the food department. In fact, on this flight, we've carried along pieces of bread. Along with the bread, we have a ham spread.
It would be mixing things too much to apply that to USB.
Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle Houston, you're go for landing, over. Roger, understand, go for landing, 3,000 feet. Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
Same type, we're go, flight. We're go. Same type, we're go. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now I want to back up and partially close the hatch. Making sure not to lock it on my way out. That's our home for the next couple hours. We want to take good care of it. Beautiful view. Magnificent desolation. Now we'll get to the details of what's around here, but it looks like a collection of just about every variety of shape, angularity, granularity, but every variety of rock you could find.
Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one.
Buzz, this is Houston. You have approximately 3 minutes until you must commence your EVA termination activity. Over. Roger, understand. Tranquility Base, Houston. You're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. We've come to the conclusion that this has been far more than 3 men on a voyage to the moon.
It's worse than that.
More still than the efforts of a government and industry team. More even than the efforts of one nation. We feel that this stands as a symbol of the insatiable curiosity of all mankind to explore the unknown.
We set sail on this new scene because there is new knowledge to be gained. and new rights to be won. And they must be won and used for the progress of all people. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Hello, Sao Paulo. I want to thank the Futura Networks for having me speak today at your campus party. You young people are indeed the future. We need your energy to fuel innovation, and I think it's important to channel your energy to figure out how best to apply the successful choices to the future. But it's also important to take risks. It takes courage to take risks, but the rewards can be great. Timing is very important and always has been a key element in my life. I've been very blessed to have been in the right place at the right time. Education, a strong work ethic, a supportive family, and a sense of adventure were also important factors in my life. I'm proud to have served my country, both in the Air Force and in the Apollo program. I like being a team player. When people work together, you can sometimes accomplish the impossible. But before I get ahead of myself, let me tell you a little bit about my grand adventure, which never could have happened without the cooperation and efforts of many people working together toward a shared goal. And then I'll give you a glimpse of what I think we should be doing in the future. Mankind has dreamed for centuries of reaching the moon, into space, and even the stars. But it wasn't until the 20th century that man took his first powered flight. In 1903, on a windy morning at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the Wright brothers flyer took their first flight defying gravity. My mother, Marion Moon, was born that same year. Only 66 years later, Neil and I stepped on the moon, fulfilling dreams of millions. This is my story of how we got there and how, when a team works together, the team in flight at age 2 with my father, Edwin Eugene Aldrin. He was an engineer and an aviation pioneer, a friend of Charles Lindbergh and Orville Wright and Howard Hughes. That time, we flew in a Lockheed Vega single-engine airplane painted red to look like an eagle. Eagle is the symbol of our country and the name of the spacecraft that we landed on the moon. The influence of aviation, I entered the Air Force after graduating from the Military Academy at West Point. Here I am during a photo op with my father sitting in the back seat. He was also an Air Force officer. And this was the time that I received my Air Force wings. My father was a civilian aviation manager for aviation fuels of the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, where he directed the aviation division and later became the manager of Newark Airport, now called Liberty Airport in New Jersey. He also worked as a consultant to the Manned Spaceflight Director at NASA. After training in jet airplanes, I was in the Korean War in 1953 as a jet fighter pilot where I flew F-66 combat missions in that wonderful F-86 Sabre jet. And I shot down 2 MiG-15 aircraft piloted by North Koreans, Chinese, Russians, I'll never tell. Following the Korean War, I was stationed in Germany on alert from 1956 to 59. In the late 50s, we were flying F-100s. In the late 50s, the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States was escalating and tensions were high. We were on alert for low altitude missions delivering nuclear weapons. On October of 1957, while I was still in Germany, the Soviet Union pulled off a sudden and unexpected technological feat. They launched Sputnik into orbit, and in response, a year later, America formed the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, with the goal of reaching space. The space age was born and a space race was about to begin. On April 12th, 1961, the Soviets made an incredible achievement by sending the first human into space, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, for one full orbit of the Earth. In response, only a few weeks later, NASA launched America's first Mercury astronaut, Alan Shepard, on a 15-minute suborbital flight that touched the edge of space. It was impressive, but we all wondered, when will we get to orbit? President John F. Kennedy asked NASA and its ranks of engineers and rocket scientists, led by Wernher von Braun, what was possible. They told him it would take at least 15 years before we could put a man on the moon. Instead of accepting what was possible, on May 25th, 1961, just 3 weeks after Alan Shepard's flight, President Kennedy boldly challenged America to commit to the goal of landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade and bringing him back safely. We kind of liked that part. We had not even put a man into orbit. The rockets and spacecraft needed to go beyond Earth orbit didn't exist. Many thought the challenge to be impossible. We didn't have the know-how. But we did have a leader with the vision, the determination, and courage, and the confidence that we could get there by publicly stating our goal and by putting a specific time period on a very specific accomplishment. President Kennedy gave us no back door. We either had to do it or fail, and no one was interested in failing. If space was going to be our next new frontier, then I wanted to be a part of getting there. After I completed my tour of duty in Germany, I decided to continue my education and received my doctorate in astronautics from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. For my thesis, I adapted my experience as a fighter pilot intercepting enemy aircraft to devise a technique for two spacecraft to meet in space called manned orbital rendezvous. Little did anyone know, including me, how critical this work would be later to our successful landing on the moon and coming back home. The first time I applied to be a NASA astronaut, I was turned down because I was not a test pilot. I didn't take that training, but I was determined and applied again. This time, my jet fighter experience and NASA's interest in my concept for rendezvous influenced them to accept me in the third group of 14 astronauts, where I became known by my astronaut peers as Dr. Rendezvous. John Houbolt, a very clever NASA engineer, figured out that if we used 4 specialized spacecraft to go to the moon, a command and service module to remain in orbit around the moon, and an ascent and descent stage of the lunar module to land and later rendezvous in orbit with the command and service module. This enabled us to have a much lighter lander, so the rocket motor didn't need to be so big, and it could be left on the surface, and the descent and the ascent stage in lunar orbit. And of course, it could require only 1 Saturn V instead of von Braun's 2 Saturn V's. And this is where my MIT rendezvous studies really paid off. The critical key to this approach would be our ability to reliably rendezvous 2 spacecraft in orbit around the moon, a very hazardous maneuver, for if it failed, there'd be no way to rescue the astronauts. Luckily, my MIT work was exactly what was needed. Now, Mercury was the first stage in the space program with 1 crew member, followed by the Gemini program with 2 astronauts, which was used to fill the gap before the very complex 3 people in the Apollo missions. Filling the gap allowed us to do many critical things while the rockets were being developed for the Apollo program. Gemini was an integral part of our training, as it helped us to learn spacewalking, long duration flights, rendezvous, and computer entry. Now, as an avid scuba diver, I was the first astronaut to train underwater, neutral buoyancy, to simulate the weightlessness in space. During my first flight as a pilot of Gemini 12, I was able to set a 5.5-hour record spacewalks while circling the globe every 90 minutes at a speed of 17,000 miles an hour. What a sight to behold the Earth below while floating outside the capsule. After 5 days in orbit, Jim Lovell and I returned to Earth, having completed the final mission in the Gemini program. It was November 1966, and we only had 3 years left to accomplish Kennedy's challenge to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Gemini had prepared us for the Apollo missions to the moon. Yeah, but we still had a lot of work to do. And just a couple of months after that flight, we lost the Apollo 1 crew in a fire on the launch pad. My very close friend, Ed White, was killed during that. In all, there was a team of 400,000 people working together on a common dream. The engineers and technicians who were designing and building the multi-stage Saturn V rocket. All the rocket scientists, aerospace industry contractors, NASA managers and administrators, and even the seamstress who sewed our spacesuits. It took a unified effort to accomplish everything that was needed. At last, we reached the day when the Saturn V rocket was first rolled out of the vehicle assembly building on its way to the launch pad. The timing was right of the crew rotation. It was just right for Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, and me to be chosen for the crew of this maybe historical mission. And on July 16th, 1969, our launch day finally arrived. We took the elevator up the gantry where the 360-foot tall Saturn V rocket stood magnificently as the countdown progressed. Due to the seating order, Neil on the left, Mike on the right, me in the center, I was the last to board the command module. And while Neil and Mike took the elevator up to the top to enter the spacecraft, I stood 2 flights down, alone on the gantry. I could see the sunrise, waves of Cocoa Beach, and I thought back to how wonderful my life had been to this point, and the many things that had worked out along the way to put me in the right place at the right time. At 9:32 a.m., the engines ignited and roared with over 7 million pounds of thrust to lift 3,000 tons of spacecraft, fuel, equipment, and 3 guys. As we cleared the gantry and rocketed skyward, we were pressed into our seats as the rapid acceleration of the rocket increased our body weight. Within 3 minutes, we were 45 miles high, experiencing 4 Gs and traveling at nearly 6,500 miles an hour. A minute later, we passed the 62-mile, 100-kilometer boundary where the sky turns blue where the blue sky turns to the blackness of space. By 12 minutes after launch, we were traveling over 17,000 miles an hour, the speed required for us to orbit the Earth. For 3 hours, we orbited twice our home as we ran through the checklist to ensure everything was working. Then we fired that engine that accelerated us to 25,000 miles an hour on a trajectory bound for the moon. On the 8-day round-trip journey, the three of us lived in a space capsule about the size of a standard automobile interior. That's a Volkswagen. On day 3, we fired the engine to slow us down enough so the moon's gravity captured us and put us into lunar orbit. Another engine burn put us into the right orbit, 50,000 feet, approaching the landing site for landing. We had estimated a 60% chance of being able to land successfully, because we could abort at various stages, and a 95% chance of returning us home safely. We kind of liked that 95%. 13 orbits of the moon later, on the morning of Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and I entered the lunar landing craft we had named Eagle and separated from the command module, Columbia, where Mike Collins remained. Piloting our powered descent to the moon's Sea of Tranquility was the most complicated and critical aspect of the whole mission. Landing was the hard part. Without landing, you can't open the hatch and go down the lander and walk around on the moon. Without our landing, they couldn't confidently land successive missions. As we descended, we saw that our landing site was full of boulders, so we continued maneuvering to find a safe area to land. This expended additional fuel, and when we landed, we had only 15 seconds of fuel left. After 11 intense minutes, Neil spoke the words, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." There's been much discussion over the last 40-some years as to why Neil was the first to step on the surface. It could be because he was the mission commander. And in our armed services, leaders are always in front of their men. It could also be because he was closer to the door. I'll never tell which it was. Now, with Neil already on the surface and snapping a few photos of me, I carefully backed down the ladder and partially closed the hatch. That's what the checklist said, being careful not to lock it on my way out. We didn't have the key. There wasn't even a handle. As I stepped onto the talcum-like lunar dust, the first words that came to my mind were magnificent desolation. It was a magnificent accomplishment for any human to set foot on another world for the first time. And yet there was the desolation of the million-year lunar landscape with no sign of life, no atmosphere, total blackness beyond the sunlit terrain. We spent a total of 2.5 hours on the surface collecting rocks, setting up experiments, taking a few photos. In this experiment, we weren't supposed to walk in front of the solar collectors on the right. But those are my footsteps on the right, as you might say, condemning evidence. That's why we got to go up there and brush those footsteps away. Now, this is the photograph that Neil took of me, known as the visor photo, because you can see the reflection of the Eagle spacecraft and Neil in the visor of my helmet. People have asked me why this photo is so great. I have 3 words: location, location, location. We planted the first American flag on the moon, and this salute was my proudest moment. I always thought that our flag looked the best of the 6 flags that had been planted there by December 1972. Unfortunately, it was the one that blew over when we lifted off. Finally, it was time for us to leave the surface. When we were getting ready to leave the moon, Houston said, "Apollo 11, you're cleared for liftoff." I couldn't resist saying, "Roger, we're number 1 on the runway." Okay, there wasn't anyone else up there, and there wasn't any runway, but it did lighten things up a bit. Nearly 1 billion people all over the world watched and listened as we ventured onto the lunar surface. Mission Control in Houston was in constant communication with us, even though we were further away than any 2 humans had ever been in terms of what we had to do to get back home. We felt connected all the time to Earth. The commemorative plaque that we left on the lunar surface reads, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969. We came in peace for all mankind." Since our splashdown in the Pacific Ocean, I've come to realize that more than the rocks we brought back or the experiments we left, the true value of Apollo is the amazing story of innovation and teamwork that went into overcoming all the obstacles to reach the moon. That effort was driven in part by competition and part by scientific discovery. Everyone on Earth felt they had participated in this incredible journey as we landed and walked on another celestial body for the first time in the history of mankind. And that feeling of participation that brought together humanity holds a value beyond measure. The world welcomed us back as heroes. However, I understood that people were not cheering for 3 guys, but for what we represented, that by coming together as a nation, we had accomplished the impossible. After the fanfare died down and returned to normal, I began to realize that what was actually harder for me than going to the moon was to return to Earth. I had reached the pinnacle of a career on the moon, but I did not anticipate the public notoriety. With the end of the Apollo program, I resumed my Air Force career and served a brief term as commandant of the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. They didn't know what to do with a pilot who had walked on the moon. I tried to help NASA regain momentum and develop more human space missions, but public devotion to the space program had waned. With NASA and the Air Force behind me, I found myself in a lifestyle marked by a few celebrity engagements, but without structure. In the process, I turned to drinking as the onset of my symptoms of inherited depression became manifest. Without any particular support among my fellow astronauts and the NASA organization I'd become a part of, this period became a dark, troublesome time. My family life was impacted and my marriage ended in a divorce. Looking back, I lost nearly a decade of productivity in a downward spiral. Ultimately, I chose the road of recovery. By 1978, I'd taken my last drink, and today I have 34 years of sobriety. It took me a while to realize that the one thing that I am most passionate about, space, was where I should once again direct my efforts. I may as well use my fame and influence to help raise awareness and advance our space program to get us on the forward track and on to Mars. So that is where my focus is. Mars. I have always felt Mars should be our next destination following our landings on the moon. I've been very vocal about this for a long time, but the dream of reaching Mars looks like it's finally getting a little closer to becoming reality. With the Curiosity rover now on the surface of Mars and showing us more than ever before, I'm hoping that it will raise the curiosity of young people of the world into the idea of exploring beyond Earth and the moon and on to Mars. Obviously, I'm passionate about Mars and forging our future in space. People ask me all the time, why do we need to go to Mars? Or why do we even need a space program? Because by venturing into space, we improve life for everyone here on Earth. The scientific advancements and innovations that come from this type of research create products and technology that we use in our daily lives, even provide more convenience to people all over the world. For example, cell phones, TV, GPS, all of these wouldn't have been possible without investments in the space program. So how do we get people excited about space again? And the big question is, how do we get there? We need a plan. Also, we need a leader in the world to state a public goal within a specific time. I've got ideas how that should happen around the 50th anniversaries of lunar landings, 2019 to 2022. That's when we need to make a commitment within 2 decades to begin permanence on the planet Mars. My new book entitled Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration is coming out in May of this year by National Geographic Society. I wanted it to be called Missions to Mars because we're not talking about just one trip there. That was too late. So I couldn't even put an S on it. We're talking about multiple missions to eventually settle and colonize Mars. Years ago, I devised a method of cycling orbits of spacecraft on continuous trajectories between Earth and Mars. Let me show you what I mean. Back in the early 80s, I began to apply my orbital rendezvous expertise to a lunar spacecraft system that would perform perpetual cycling orbits between Earth and the Moon. Central to this idea was using the relative gravitational forces of the Earth and the Moon to sustain the orbit, thereby expending very little fuel. And this is called gravity assist. But there was a catch. The approach took longer to get to the Moon this way. For such a short distance, a 4-day trip using cycling orbits was not sufficiently advantageous if you're going to land on the Moon itself. And my good friend Tom Paine, who was a former NASA administrator during a number of the Apollo program expeditions, including ours, he urged me to adapt the cycling orbit concept to the much more intricate goal of supporting human missions to Mars. And lo and behold, it works. Don't know whether you're paying attention, but the blue circle obviously is Earth orbit, and the red is Mars orbit, and the green takes a green short trajectory to Mars, then it orbits a couple times, makes a pass by the Earth, which changes its orbit. I started working on this idea with Purdue University back in the 80s, but again more recently, and with the help of my interns and NASA colleagues, we've improved on this. Now, this is the radial distance from the Sun. And for circular coplanar orbits, the Earth at 1 astronomical unit is a straight line with time. And Mars, being slightly elliptic, is a straight line also for these simple calculations. So the transfer occurs green path. People get on the Earth, they get off at Mars. Then the cycler continues to make orbits out to Mars, swings back, and now encounters the Earth again at E3. The Earth bends the orbit, decreasing its energy, and then an orbit and a half, it's ready to do that again with the solid green line. Now the dotted green line is the second orbiter, second cycler. We need 2 to do this. 1 to do opportunity 1, 3, 5, 7, and the other one 2, 4, 6, 8. And each opportunity is 26 months, a little over 2 years apart. I believe that we can get there between 2035 and 2040. Now, this next is the Aldrin Mars Cycler. There we go. There is Mars going by, and we're seeing a complete rotational view of these 2 components for redundancy of the Mars Cycler. The lander would be put on the bottom, and probably an inflatable for additional habitation on top. I won't go into the detail about each component, but at least it should give you an idea of what a cycler could look like. It'll probably change as new technologies evolve, but this is the basic idea. I'll have my updates about my unified space vision on my website soon at www.buzzaldrin.com. As new technologies emerge, we'll try and keep this site up to date. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @TheRealBuzz. I could go on and on about Mars, but my mission director, Christina, tells me it might get too technical. So if you're interested in learning more, go to my website and click on Space Vision. Humans need to explore, to push beyond current limits, just like we did 44 years ago. To make this vision a reality will require public support and cooperation, and we need to make sure that the younger generation is excited about studying the STEAM subjects: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. We don't want it to be. What we need most is for the next generation to be motivated to push technological boundaries and to seek out new innovations. It's the only way we can move forward. Aside from my space efforts, I still have adventuresome spirit today. I've been to the North Pole with TV and radio commentator Hugh Downs on a Russian nuclear icebreaker. And I've been down 3,810 meters, or approximately 2 miles, on the ocean floor to see the Titanic and a yellow French submersible. My favorite thing to do on this planet is to scuba dive, and I try to do it at least a couple times a year when my schedule allows. Now, here I am on a trip to Galapagos in 2010. My son Andy took this picture of me for a birthday present, hitching a ride on a whale shark. Don't try this at home, kids. They don't bite, they just swallow. I might even drive an environmentally green Hummer to the South Pole later this year, maybe. You just never know where I'll be in the world. As for the future, I strongly believe that we need to get the world excited again about space exploration and have the pioneering spirit to reach beyond our boundaries and current capabilities. I hope we can get the next generation to feel as we did when I was privileged to be a part of the Apollo program. Apollo is the story of people at their best, working together for a common goal. We started with a dream, and we can do these kinds of things again. With a united effort and a great team, you too can achieve great things in your life. I know, because I'm living proof that this can be done. Thank you very, very much. Now, if you'll sit down, I may be able to see somebody who has a question, and oh, I'm supposed to listen. And
then you can choose one person to
Gente, ele vai responder uma pergunta.
One
então,
question? Okay, you'll translate.
Ele vai escolher alguém.
This guy out
Levantem
front
a
is
mão.
waving pretty loud.
Where's the translation device to? It's the round one.
Yeah, I know. Let's listen to him first.
Okay.
Oh, here.
First, I would like to thank you for coming here and tell your stories and you did to us. Thank you very much. I would like to ask, I hope this isn't an unpleasant question, but I have this curiosity. Well, the mission to the moon was a big success. All the world knew about it. But when this was done, we had the Cold War. And the Russian was also trying to do big things in that time. If it was a competition, we could say that it's not the case. We could say that United States win I would like to ask, what effect do you think the moon mission has in the Cold War? How this change for good or for bad the Cold War?
That's a very good question. The mission to the moon and the commitment to do that, when Khrushchev said, "We'll bury you," was a great disappointment to the Soviet Union. They thought they were superior. And I firmly believe that our succeeding in demonstrating to our people, to the world, and to the Soviets what we could do eroded, diminished their confidence in themselves, and brought about the beginnings of the end of the Cold War. That's what I believe. They may not believe that, but I think the evidence is very evident that something caused them, the Soviets, to change their aggressiveness toward the rest of the world. And now we, I guess, see that aggressiveness taking on slightly different characteristics. This was a peaceful solution to nuclear catastrophe, and I hope that we can come up with peaceful solutions to nuclear catastrophes in the future. Going to Mars may not be in time to do that. Let's hope that there are many other peaceful solutions. I will not be around to see human beings land on the moon, on Mars, I'm quite sure. My son will be, and he'll be helping carry on my legacy. Addressing you folks at campus parties about what we might do in the future, and feeling confident and helping to plan that makes the span of my mother's birth in 1903, my being on the moon, and then planning Earthlings to land on Mars. What more could a human being ask than to be around to participate in such a marvelous advancement of humankind? So I thank you again for listening and bringing me here to talk about our future and your contributions to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, boss. Obrigada, gente.